What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, Mtg. We like a magic, you know by now. And today, we're going to look at some more Modern Horizon spoilers. That's a huge shocker. We do have a deck tech coming up a little bit later on tonight. You don't see those too often anymore during spoiler season, but we're gonna try to make that happen. But before we get to that, we got to talk about some spoilers. They didn't really drop a whole lot of cards today, but there's definitely some ish to talk about. So let's get to it. Well, let's clean up a little bit from yesterday. We got some cards a little later on last night, like Answered Prayers. I like that this is just a common. It's 3 mana, 1 and 2 white for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. If Answered Prayers isn't a creature, it becomes a 3/3 angel creature with flying in addition to its other types until end of turn. Again, this is pauper playable, so that's cool. You get like an Ajani's Welcome that also has sort of a mechanic that we last saw. Well, I don't know if we last saw it, but it most reminds me of Urza's Block. These enchantments that turn into creatures whenever X or Y effect happens. And these are actually pretty good in the limited environment, like really good in the limited environment. And if they're really low costed, they can actually be constructed playable. I don't know that this thing is, but I will say, you know, white-based pauper decks that play a bunch of creatures might actually want a piece like this. I'm interested in it. Up next is Twisted Reflection. We saw this last night too. I thought this might have been a reprint at first, but when I looked up Twisted Reflection, all I got was Kami of Twisted Reflection, which is nothing like this card. But this is actually pretty good. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. Choose 1. Target creature gets -6/-0 until end of turn, or switch target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. But you can entwine both for 1 black mana. So for 3 mana, you get a spell that effectively kills almost any creature, even creatures that have like indestructible and stuff. And I think that's really, really cool. It's going to be a great piece of limited removal, but I'm not sure it really goes any farther than that. Up next, though, a card that's a little bit more impactful. I'm going to show my face for this one. This is Vesper Lark right here. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/1 elemental creature with flying. I mean, it leaves the battlefield. Return target creature card with power 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you can evoke it for 1 and a white. So it's like a little baby Revelark. Revelark is one of my favorite cards from Lorwyn Block. God, I miss Revelark so bad. I know it's still a deck in Modern. I just don't play much Modern. I'm going to probably start after this set. Jeez. But anyway, I really, really like the design on this. And there's a lot of really good hits for it in the format, too. Now, first of all, there's the stuff you might immediately think of. Devoted Druid, Viscera Seer, you know, there are multiple ways to just dump these cards in your graveyard, either from your hand or from your library, milling yourself or something like that. And then just use the Lark to get them back from your graveyard. That's easy enough, but there's a bunch of wonky stuff you can do with this. Like any creature that's effectively 0 power, but it comes into play with +1/+1 counters, your Triskelions and stuff like that, works really, really well with this. That's a cool interaction to point out. But then there's crazy stuff, you know, like Gigantomancer. That's just 1 power, you know? Run a search on Scryfall or something, or on Gatherer, of like cards that cost like 7 or 8 mana, but only have 1 power. There are plenty of creatures like this in Magic, like Tristani's Summoner is another good example, you know? It's going to give you all the power in the world across a bunch of bodies. I don't know, it might actually make some kind of bad cards like a little bit more playable. I like Revelark so much that I'm really interested in like at least getting in the lab with this and like seeing what can be done, because it's still a really, really interesting card. And it might even go in Revelark combo decks, you know? It's just a really cool thing that does a lot of interesting garbage that I haven't even scratched the surface of. Card looks a little unassuming at first, but it does all the things. But up next, another ridiculous uncommon. This is Tribute Mage. Right here, it's just a tribute. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. And when Tribute Mage enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 2, reveal that card, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. So it's just a mostly better Trinket Mage, you know? Trinket Mage searches up a whole host of other targets this can't get, but of course this searches up a whole bunch of stuff Trinket Mage can't get, you know? I think it's really interesting that like Urza is in this set. We've been talking about Thopter Sword combo a little bit more here recently, and this searches up both pieces of the Thopter Sword combo. That is, interesting, right? So it's like, I think they might want this deck to actually be real. All the implications for this card aren't just Modern, they aren't just Commander, this fits in multiple formats. And again, it especially fits in one particular combo deck we're all trying to kind of put our heads together on right now. It definitely looks like Wizards is giving us the pieces for that. Up next, we got Reckless Charge, a reprint from Odyssey Block. This is just 1 red mana for a sorcery. Target creature gets +3/+0 and gains haste until end of turn and has Flashback 2 and a red. This is yet another card that looks unassuming, at first glance, but I think it might actually have like real use in the modern meta. And yeah, it's a reprint, so it already existed, but just to remind you, like if you're playing Shu Yun and Commander or something, this goes really, really well with that. Now, you have a little bit more access to the card than you previously did. I mean, random Odyssey block commons are not necessarily hard to get your hands on, but if you're not going to be ordering cards from online, it's not a guarantee your LGS just has these. So I guess a little bit more, availability is always a good thing. But in the modern format, you get like Dreadhorde Arcanist to pair this with. And I actually think it might be really good. Like you already had Titan Strength, which, looks like the better card in some ways, but you get to cast this twice. And especially in Arcanist decks, that's just absolutely invaluable. So I like a lot about this. Like you can cast it off Arcanist the first time for free, and then you just flash it back and cast something really big out of your graveyard when you attack with Arcanist. So if anything, though, I think this alongside Arcanist is going to be maybe good enough in Modern. I'm interested in trying it out. But you want an impactful, lower rarity reprints? I'll give you Carrion Feeder. It's just crazy now, man. This card's in Modern. Just 1 black mana for a zombie. It's a 1/1 and it can't block. You can sacrifice a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Carrion Feeder. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's that. Carrion Feeder's in Modern. The internet is full of people commenting that they've been waiting on this moment for like 4 to 10 years, somewhere in that range. There's a lot of zombie players and combo players that can now do some of the things they wanted to do, play their respective decks, because Carrion Feeder is in the format. Just like Vesper Lark is a better card than it looks like because it's a free sacrifice outlet for 1 mana, and Carrion Feeder is the same way, except like it can get really, really big over the course of a game. This is a very scary card, especially alongside a bunch of zombies that are going to come back from the graveyard anyway. This is just insanely powerful looking to me. They did it. They did it, y'all. I honestly did not. There's been some speculation for the last few years that eventually Carrion Feeder is going to get reprinted into the Modern format. And I wasn't sure they were going to do it. It's not like the card is too powerful or anything, but I figured they were just going to stick us with Vesper Lark forever. But no, this, goes in, more tribal-based decks and has sort of the same function in a lot of combo decks too. So, if anything, it goes alongside Vesper Lark to make some combo decks a little bit more, consistent. And that is good enough for the card to see a buttload of play on maybe day one. Like Carrion Feeder is actually a lot more hype than you might think it is. Up next, another tribal black creature here, but it's a different tribe. We got to see Charming Vampire today, a 1/1 vampire for 2 black mana. And when it or another creature dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. Is it just me, or does this look like totally bananas? Like there's going to be like if you have a big enough board, you can just sacrifice a vampire with like 1 or 2 power and get way more power out of that sacrifice. Hey, Ziggy. Plus, like, you can turn the sacrifice into, an upside pretty easily. But maybe my favorite part of this card is that it just, whenever another creature dies, it doesn't have to be one of your creatures or anything. It's just like whenever one of your opponent's creatures dies, whenever one of your guys dies, anything. It doesn't have to be a non-token, just based on this initial translation here that we've gotten on the internet. It doesn't care whether or not it's yours or your opponent's creatures, and it doesn't care whether they're tokens or not. And like that is exactly how this ability needs to be worded to actually be playable. Okay, I'll give it to you. There is at least one way it could be worded better if you didn't have to play tribal vampires to make the card work. But you do. Yeah, all you guys have to be vampires if you want to get the most juice out of this, but I think that's probably worth it. And even though this might not seem much like actual Modern play, this is one of those cards that I don't mind them putting into Commander, because there's plenty of Commander vampire decks, and this slots right in. A lot of them are going to be losing their creatures in combat through their own like self-board wipes anyway some of the time. Sometimes they're going to be sacrificing creatures, There's a lot of ways that vampire decks send creatures to the graveyard, not just their own, but their opponents too. So I can just imagine over the course of a couple of turns or a couple of removal spells, sacrifice triggers, whatever, your entire board just gets impossible to deal with outside of a Wrath effect. And I also like that if you can say maybe give one of your vampires like indestructibility at instant speed in response to a Wrath of God or something like that, then suddenly that thing gets freaking enormous. So there's lots of ways that you could finagle things to your favor here, and I really like this card. For a really low mana investment, that's a pretty powerful effect. but maybe, possibly, in a day of pretty impactful uncommon reprints, the most impactful uncommon reprints of the day, TMRC, are these cycling lands that cycle for just 1 mana of their respected color. They all enter the battlefield tapped. We're all relatively familiar with these. But the reason that I like these so much is that one of the main criticisms of a card like, say, Astral Drift is that we don't have specifically these lands in the modern format to play off of it, and now we do. You don't have that excuse anymore, so Astral Drift might actually see some real play with these cards in the format, but obviously it's way bigger than just that. You know, having all these in the format makes a lot of decks a little bit more consistent. Being able to cycle your lands is something that a lot of, especially slower decks, are going to want to do, control decks and whatnot, and even some aggro decks. Traditionally, the ability to turn, you know, a dead land top deck into a live card is really, really valuable. Even in a a faster format like Modern is, this is a really, really desirable ability. So I would expect, you know, a copy or two of these to creep into even decks that aren't trying to cycle specifically or combo in some weird way. But these obviously go really well in all of the lands decks, you know, the Wrenn and 6 deck. These are going to be really, really impactful in. It's just nice that we have a bunch of lands in this set. This is going to be really good for the limited environment too, that can draw cards. You know, the Horizon lands, once they're in play, you don't need them anymore. You can sack them to draw cards. These, you can just discard out of your hand to draw cards. So there's a lot of flood protection, not only in the limited environment, but in Modern in specific now. And I really like that these lands got introduced for a multitude of reasons. Another uncommon reprint today. This one maybe not as impactful, but still, we got to see Rebuild from Urza's Legacy today with really, really cool new art. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for an instant, return all artifacts to their owner's hands, cycle it for 2. So kind of a 1 mana more Hurkyl's Recall that works on all artifacts instead of just like one person's. And again, I'm not sure like how important this card is, although it could probably play hell against like affinity decks and stuff like that. So maybe it's a little more important than I'm giving it credit for. But in the way of artifact destruction, we also saw Shenanigans today, which actually mostly keeps people off of Shenanigans. You know, it's just a shatter at sorcery speed, 2 mana, 1 in red for a sorcery, destroy target artifact. But it also dredges for 1, and that is actually really, really big. Not only for decks that already want to dredge, because they can take out decks like, you know, Lantern, they can take out Ensnaring Bridge and stuff like that. So that is very, very important, just in and of itself right there. But I actually think this might be better than even a card like, say, Ancient Grudge in the Modern format, because you can effectively just use it over and over as many times as you need to, or as many times as you can draw cards. You can't really say that about Grudge, you know, 2 times tops on that. So I actually think that this is probably the better card, and it's a lot easier to cast for more decks too. So this looks a little unassuming at first, but I actually think that this is a real card in Modern, especially since a lot of decks that you want to break artifacts against, you're going to have to break more than 1 artifact over the course of a game. This allows you to do just that. So, again, doesn't look like much, but dredge 1 on kill that artifact for a pretty low cost is actually really good. Now, if all of the cycling lands weren't enough, we also got Tectonic Reformation today, which basically turns all the lands in your hand into Forgotten Caves. You know, it's just 1 in a red for an enchantment. Each land in your hand has cycling red, and you can cycle it for 2 mana too. I guess I should say 2 mana as well. 2 mana also, but anyway, you know, 2 mana Tombian. Anyway, this is actually really good, I think. I actually do, you know. Maybe again in the Wrenn and 6 deck, this is a decent play, although I'm not really sure that any deck wants to just like take off their turn 2 to play this, especially when it competes with Wrenn and 6 in the 2-drop slot. So I might be wrong on that, but at the very least, this makes it to where like you'll never draw dead again for the rest of the game. Once you have your lands out, you can just trade any land that you draw for 1 red mana and cycle it. That's good. But of course, if you get this too early in the game for it to matter, or if you'd rather play Wrenn and 6 on turn 2, you just do just that. And then eventually you'll cycle this away. Or you can play it on turn 4 or 5, trade it in, you know, immediately spend some mana to trade in lands in your hand, you know. There's just a lot of things that you could do with this, and although I don't think it'll be more than like a 1 or 2 of in these land-based decks, it will probably get its slot at the very least. But up next is, I love this name, Hogak, Arisen Necropolis. This is 7 mana, 5 and then 2 hybrid Golgari mana for an 8/8 legendary avatar, and you can't spend mana to cast this spell. Here's the catch here. It has Convoke and Delve and you may cast it from your graveyard. Oh, and by the way, that's trample too. Okay, so here's the thing with this card. This looks extremely powerful, right? 2 mana, effectively, most plays, most days too, for an 8/8 trample. That's about the best rate you could hope for. It's like a Super-Gurmag angler, or like a Super Tassiger, or whatever you want to call it. I actually think the Gurmag angler comparison is a lot more apt because it's just a not quite vanilla creature. It does have trample, but it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot else once it hits the battlefield besides attack. And that's one of the problems with it, is that like a lot of creatures in Modern have to do more than just attack. But that's not like my worst problem with it. The big thing is, even if you're casting this from your graveyard, which you most often will be, convoking this into play can happen in like tokens decks and stuff, but it very likely is not going to very often. I'd say the big game with this is like milling it into your graveyard, or discarding it somehow, and then just casting it from there by delving. It's probably going to be the most common application here, but you still have to have at least 2 creatures on the battlefield. They have to be either black or green, or just, I guess, Golgari, whatever. But like they have to be specific colors, and you have to have 2 creatures one way or the other. And that is actually way harder than you might think in Modern to like guarantee. You're not always going to have 2 creatures to tap to bring this out. Although I will say they could definitely have asked for way more. Just having to have 2 guys out to get this into play, not a huge deal, but in the decks that want to play it, that are mostly just going to be like self-milling the entire game or trying to discard as many cards as possible, it's also not a guarantee that you're going to be able to work enough creatures into that deck to reliably cast this. So I've got my eye on it. Like, I really want this card to be extremely powerful, but it is a little bit limited, and I'm wondering if that's enough to kill it. But I do hope it's playable, because I just want to say, like, Hogak! All the time. This is probably the ugliest name of a Magic card that's ever existed, which is really saying something. But don't get the wrong idea. I really, really like the card. I don't know. I'm just trying to be pragmatic about the card. It's something I usually hate when people say, because it means they're going to say something really jerky after that. But still, this time I think it works. I'm trying to be realistic. I think that there are definitely limitations put on the card that are fair, and that's a good thing. But we do have to recognize that there are, in fact, limitations in the first place. But up next, my favorite card of the day, so far at least, at time of recording. This is Echo of Eons. 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. But you can flash this back for 2 and a blue. This is outrageous. It really is, It's not like exactly Timetwister or anything, but it's very much like a Timetwister, 6 mana is not the best rate for this on its face. That's just a time spiral right there. Not the set, but the card. Already not bad. Not a bad card, right? You don't get to untap the land. Sorry about that. But still, 6 mana is a rate if you have to cast it for that. But really, I would imagine this card will get cast for its actual casting cost like 1 out of 100 times. This thing goes in decks that want to flash it back. Sometimes, like, on turn 3, I can imagine that being a thing in combo decks, just like, I don't know, Cathartic Reunion on turn 2, and then this on turn 3 is very, very easy. We just saw, like, Bazaar Trade Mage the other day, which lets you Bazaar Baghdad when it enters the battlefield. Whoops, discard this, flash it back. Like, there's going to be plenty of probably very unfair combo decks that want to take advantage of this card, and will. This is my argument is that this is about as close as we've ever gotten to actual Timetwister, because again, 9 times out of 10, this is 99 times out of 100. This is just going to cost you 3 mana to cast. And I mean, like, yeah, you got to dump it in the graveyard first, but as we've already kind of mentioned here, how hard is that? It's not hard at all. Not to mention, by the way, that in the middle of this also kind of hoses any graveyard strategies your opponent might be playing. So that's nice. Plus, you're probably going to be milling yourself, to get this into your graveyard in the first place, or at the very least discarding cards. So this allows you to get back all the other stuff in your graveyard that you might want to get back, have the chance of drawing it again, There's just like so many ways you could abuse the card. It is not at all hard to dump this in with a Faithless Looting on turn 1. And then, like, next turn, if you really want to be that person, and use, like, Simian Spirit Guide, Timetwister, It's just really, it's really, really cool. And at the very least, it's going to be like a really commander playable card. These kind of like Timetwister and wheel effects are just always really, really heavily sought after and highly played. So I just, I like the card. The card so much. And I actually like don't want to go out on the deep end here, and I probably am, but like this could actually see like legacy play or something. There's just too many unfair things you can do with it is my point. Whew. That's all we got for today, ladies and germs, but I'm sure we'll have more just crazy garbage tomorrow. You know, if you wanted impactful cards, modern players, we got you some impactful cards today and every day. I really don't know what modern players are fussing about. There's an awful lot of modern playable stuff in this set, and even though we didn't see, apart from like the last couple of cards, we didn't see anything just out of control today. Even some of the reprints are just like obviously going to see play in modern. So I'm still liking this set more and more every day. Just let me know how you feel about it down there in the comments section. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Let me know where I went wrong on any of these or any interactions I didn't point out. All that stuff. And also subscribe if you haven't done it yet. What are you waiting for? Hit the bell for the notifications so you know what's going on around these parts. And also, hit up TCG Player. If you want to order any of this biznaz for the lowest price on the internet, including sealed product, which they still have for relatively cheap now. Get in on that before the set blows up. It will. And then also, if you really, really like my face and my content, there's a link in the description. Hop on over to Patreon. Just pledge $1 a month. That said, $5 and $10 patrons, your cards are going out tomorrow. So you should get them in the middle of next week or even at the beginning of next week, kind of depending on where you live relative to me. But signed cards are going out soon. But all I ask is $1 a month. If you want to do that, I'll let you vote on decks and I'll let you know what we're doing 24 hours in advance. So do all the things if you have the energy for that on your way out before you hit the lights. And I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Yeah, I'm feeling rich. And I'm finally about to cash out. Smothered and covered like I'm some hash browns. Glass clown, stash crowns till I pass out. Bass, trout, lobster on my plate. Milking the cash cow. Stacks tall as shack. Protect your neck and watch your back. I'm counting checks and cracking packs. Collecting decks and pumping gas.